Hi, everyone. I'm Bethany. I'm here with Chris Valentin.
Yes, she is.
She is.
She's here with me. Hi.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
Today is May 4th. May the 4th be with you. Have you ever heard that?
Oh, may the 4th be with you.
Joke.
Wow.
But this is actually Star Trek.
This is Star Trek.
There's a difference between Trek and Star Wars.
Oh, there is?
Yeah.
Oh, no, Star Wars. Yeah, I know.
Star Wars
this is Star Trek.
Are very different.
Star Trek is in. I love Star Trek.
Thanks, you guys, for coming. Thank you for ordering.
The book.
Pre-ordering Chris's book. You're here today because you ordered it. And this is your exclusive bonus webinar that you get for pre-ordering the book. So we've got some people here from Idaho, Pennsylvania, Virginia, San Francisco, all over.
San Francisco. I left my heart. Okay.
You can keep going. I mean, that's fine. People actually came here to hear you sing.
No, I don't think they did, actually.
That's why we're here.
I actually think I could sing, but nobody else agrees with me.
Well, sometimes you just gotta.
You should hear me in the shower, dude. I rock it.
I'm sure you do. I think everyone sounds good in the shower. It's like
really?
You have acoustics or something. Or in there.
I sound like a little bit like Elvis Presley and Elton John.
That's a good mix.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I like it. So we have some questions that you guys sent in to us that I'm going to ask Chris. And then we also have a little chat on the screen. And so you can send in questions that way. And if we can get to the questions there, we'll do that too.
Okay, good.
But the first question I have for you is, in the intro of the book, you talked about God's definition of wealth.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, this is actually a question sent in by someone named Melody. I'm wondering if you can tell us, how did you come up with that definition? Was that like an encounter that you had with the Lord?
No, not really. I was just thinking about God's definition of wealth as I just read through, hundreds of passages about riches, wealth, and people who had wealth. You just go read through the Proverbs.
Yeah.
The Proverbs. I probably read Proverbs. I don't know. I read it every day for the months I was doing the book, and I was just thinking about all the different definitions of prosperity just alone in Proverbs.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I was thinking through the life of Jesus, who was, from the standpoint of heaven, he was wealthy, right? Not with money, obviously. So, I actually kind of crafted those definitions out of months of reading scriptures about wealth and riches.
Wow.
And contrasting it. Proverbs is beautiful about contrasting with contrasting things.
Yeah.
So like the lazy man does this, the diligent man does this, the fool does this, the wise man does this. So I'm like, well, one of the ways that and this doesn't actually answer that question directly, but one of the ways we capture truth is when we contrast it.
Yeah.
When somebody says, whatever, like my car's expensive. It's like, what's an expensive car?
Yeah.
Well, so now we're going to say what an average car costs, and we're going to contrast it with an average car.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that when we use contrasts, it helps us to understand a point. And when we talk about prosperity, it helps us to realize, like, God believes in prosperity, but prosperity from God's perspective does have, its multidimensional definitions.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think one of the things that I love most is you talking about Jesus and his abundance and his mentality. Yeah. So I have a question from...
You got a lot of questions there.
I have a lot. They're really good too. Okay, the question is from Les, and talking about abundance mentality.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do if you're living with somebody who doesn't share the same mentality, who doesn't share...
You should get rid of them immediately.
Okay, what if this is your spouse who you have a covenant relationship with?
Probably not as quickly get rid of them.
Right, probably not.
No, we're obviously joking. We should be careful because my humor gets me in trouble all the time.
And you don't believe in divorce? Yes, okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. Although some people go through a divorce, like my son, we have to work through those issues. But
and you have a great podcast about divorce, by the way.
Yeah, by the way, if you haven't seen it and you've gone through a divorce, we have a great podcast
on. Be sure to listen to that.
On that, and it's really positive. It's by the way, before you do, we should say it's really positive. It's really hopeful for people who have gone through divorce.
It's very redemptive.
Yeah, very redemptive. So I'm sorry, your question.
So my question was,
oh yeah, I remember the question.
Yeah, who doesn't necessarily agree with, or who doesn't want to have a prosperity.
I think you have to kind of get to the root of why people are like that, and there's a lot of people like that. There's people that hope deferred makes their heart sick.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I hoped for this. I dreamt of this. I dreamt marriage is going to be like this.
Yeah.
I dreamt life was going to be like this.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Yeah.
So like talking about prosperity, a prosperity message or a prosperity life is kind of like, well, I'm not going to get my hopes up, because every time I do it, my hopes just get slammed on the rocks of discouragement and like my marriage might be an example of, I was hoping for a prince and maybe I didn't get a frog, but I definitely didn't get exactly what I want. And so I'm like, that just like, it's just easier to not have any hope, and just every day is better than you expect it, because you expected nothing. But Bethany, we got to realize, like, hope is the foundation of faith. Faith is the evidence of things hoped for. So here's the deal. You're like, okay, well, I don't want to get my hopes up, because then, my hope could be deferred and I could be sick. I could be heart sick. But here's the deal. That's true. And life is a risk.
Yeah.
But if I don't hope, then everything that comes by faith, which is everything in the kingdom, I derailed.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, if I hope a lot, I maybe hope up here, and my life's going to be here, because let's face it, not everything works out great. We are not in heaven.
Yeah.
But if I don't hope, I live here.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so I can say I'm never going to hope, and I'm like, okay, I live at a 2 every day. Like, this is the height of my life is a 2.
Yeah.
And 1 to 10 is, in my metaphor. And if I hope, I'm going to live at a 7. And I'm like, if I hope for a 10, I'm going to live at a 7. But if I don't hope at all, I'm going to live at a 2.
Yeah.
And so, I think that there's so many people that they have to learn. We all have to learn. And this is an ongoing learning process for us, that God is bigger than our disappointments. And so, you have them in your life. I have them in mine. We all have them. Like, if you've lived longer than 10 years old, you have things that happen in life that, like, they just suck, and you're like, that just sucks. And now what am I going to do? Well, now I'm going to tap into the God who's more than enough, and I'm going to walk through that.
That's good.
And maybe, like in the case with our son, he went through a divorce. We hoped that they would restore their marriage.
Yeah.
We hoped that it would work. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, you have to make the best. You have to do the best you can with the circumstances you're given.
Yeah.
And you have to go on hoping again.
Yeah. What advice would you give to, let's say, a wife who wanted to tithe, but let's say her husband didn't agree with tithing or didn't have a value for it?
There's so many different dynamics in marriage, and here's the deal. Like, for me, let's say when my wife and I don't agree, which, happens at times, because if you have 2 thinking people, you're going to have disagreements.
Yeah.
Well, in our marriage, we're both equally powerful, but distinctly different. So if my wife said, I want to tithe, and I said, well, I don't want to tithe, I'm like, well, tithe on your wage. Like, she works, she makes, good money. She's been here a long time. I'm like, you can, if you want to tithe, you can tithe on your wage, but you're not tithing on mine.
Yeah.
If there's one breadwinner, and maybe that's the man or the woman, whatever, but like, there's one breadwinner, and whoever's winning, whoever's actually physically out working for money, and we all understand that, being a mom at home or being a dad at home is more than a full-time job. So
it is.
I want to be careful to not say, well, one person's working, one's not.
Right.
One person's, bringing in money, and one person's, saving money by.
Yeah.
But whatever that is. But let's say the dynamic is the person who's not out making the money is the one who wants to tithe.
Yeah.
That becomes a little bit more, the difference, it's pretty dynamic, because it's like, okay, so, or the husband or the wife, whoever doesn't want to tithe, just like insist, like, you are not spending any of our money on that. So there's so many dynamics, tithing is not the beginning of a great marriage, So I would say gosh, sex and money, and depending on what survey you listen to, are the root of almost all problems in marriage.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So some put sex first, some put money first, but the point is, they're two two rails.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'd say, if you can't agree, let's forget tithing from it. If you can't agree on money, like, go get some help, because
that's good.
That's a lot more serious than you think.
Yeah.
And so, I have private Facebook messages, literally daily. Like, my husband doesn't want to tithe. My husband doesn't want to give. My wife doesn't want to do this. What do I do? And I always send a message saying, yeah, I don't know all the details.
Right. You can't really give advice without knowing them, but
exactly.
Yeah. I think getting help is a great answer.
Yeah.
Getting outside help.
And realizing like that might just be the tip of an iceberg that's much bigger, right?
Yeah.
But if somebody came into my accounts, if they came in and I was counseling them, and one did and one didn't, I would definitely say honor each other. And, when whoever's not winning the money, not out getting money, still worth half the wages. Yeah. I would say, my recommendation, if they couldn't come in agreement, would be, well, whatever is his that he thinks he should tithe, he should tithe on his part.
Yeah.
But that's not the answer for everybody. So I want to be careful.
Yeah, that's good.
Chris Valentin said, this is what we should do. Oh my goodness, I've got enough of those letters to realize, don't do marriage counseling when you don't know the people.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Chris is not marriage counseling you right now.
Yeah.
Just for the record, this is not official advice.
Exactly.
From Chris Valentin. I want to say real quickly, there's a few people, looks like you got disconnected, but now you're back on. This is being recorded, so you can go back and watch it later if you missed anything. So don't worry. This wisdom, you can still get it later on.
Just all this wisdom.
I know. It's
isn't it good? The internet is like, you say something and it remembers it forever. So if you say something you didn't want to say, it remembers it forever.
It also listens to you. That's a different story.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so this is a question from Sarah. So you told the story in the book about the watch that you got in Romania, and then you had to give it away. Mm-hmm. And from Sarah's perspective, what God said to you about that watch was, if you don't give away your watch, I'll just take away your blessings. So she said she had a hard time with that story and is kind of wanting to get some more context, because I don't think that's really what God said to you. But
no, it's kind of like this. Okay, let's say that you're faithful and generous, and we'll just use metaphors for a second.
Yeah.
You make $1,000 a month and you're faithful and generous there. You don't worry about it. You give your tithe. You whatever, you see somebody on the street, you don't mind helping. And then you're like, okay, then you make $2,000 and you're faithful and generous. Yeah. But you get to some point, like you made $10,000 and you're like, this is all my money. You know what? I'm pretty blessed here. And I'm going to change my lifestyle to help that poor person. God goes, oh, okay, let's get you back down to 9,000. Because when you're at 9,000, you were experiencing the kingdom.
Yeah.
But now that you're at 10,000, like that money, it's sort of like it outgrew, like the amount that you made outside kind of outgrew your kingdom values inside.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're a different person. You know, we all know people that money ruined them. Well, we see a lot of them in the NFL, NBA, and in baseball, Major League Baseball. We see like people get, these young men, and in this case, young men, they get all this money and they've never had money before. And all of a sudden it's just like, wow, it's all gone.
Right. And
so I think that, my deal with the Lord was metaphorically about watches, Yeah. Funny thing, to just on a side note, someone gave me a Rolex watch, a month ago or something.
Yeah.
And, obviously a very expensive watch I've never had before. I've never intentionally collected watches. People just give them to me.
Yeah.
And I when I got that watch, because the Lord has specifically spoken to me through watches, I'm like, I feel like the Lord's like, watch what I'm going to do next. I just watch what I'm going to do next.
Wow.
I just gave you a Rolex watch. And I'm like,
wow.
So you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not the watch. Like if you got a Rolex watch, it just might be a nice watch to you.
Yeah.
But because the Lord way back when I was in poverty began starting, I pay attention,
Yeah.
I pay attention to this certain thing because it's been a sign in my life.
Yeah.
So I think it might, and I do agree with her, like it could have sounded like that. And it's kind of a personal, it's kind of, yeah, I did kind of make it broad, but it's kind of a personal testimony for me.
And it wasn't really God saying he was punishing you. It was more like, hey, he wanted to work on your heart and what was going on in your heart.
He's like, oh, if not now, you know, I gave you a whatever $2,000 watch and now you can't be generous.
Yeah.
Now you're like, I like that so much, I'm keeping it all for myself. And the Lord's like, oh, when you were poorer, you were more generous. Why don't we bring you back down to the level that you're experiencing in the kingdom?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I can experience the kingdom here. I'm good. and I think it's just part of us growing up. And of course, I've given away so many watches since then and other things too. But I mean, it's just like, you know, I don't hesitate now. The Lord's like, give that guy your, I'm like, you can have one more here. You can have my, you know, no, I have 50 people write me like, I'd like to have your Rolex. Like, no way.
Okay, we're going to switch gears to some business questions.
Okay.
So in the book, you talk about multiple streams of income. Do you think, this is a question from Luke, do you think that we should all try and have our own businesses?
No.
Should we all try to invest in our skills to make money as a separate source of income?
Okay, well, it depends on what we're going to call business. Okay, so maybe the answer should be yes and no. My immediate answer when I think of business is like, I don't go to work and I have a business, or I have this business that I work at 30 hours a week and everyone should have one of those. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. In that definition, I would say no.
Okay.
But on the other side, if we're going to define business as anything that creates income, then I'm like, okay, if we're going to, you know, like, where'd you get the number 5? I just pulled it out of a hat. I'm like, and the reason I just pulled the number 5 out is because I think 5 sources stretches people. I think it makes them think.
Yeah.
If I said 2 sources, they're like, okay, well, you know, I do this and I paint paintings and I sell them to people who ever wants them. I'm like, that's great, but you're capable of more than that.
Yeah, that's good.
So yeah, so the goal is to kind of get people thinking like, you know, we did this thing. I'll tell you the story real quick. We started a business school here originally. We only lasted a couple of years because it was premature. Now, of course, we have Bethel Technology and we're doing some other things.
Yeah.
But one of the things we did is we gave every single student $100. Like we had 35 or 37 students. We gave them $100 at the beginning of the year. Yeah. Okay, here's your $100. Here's your $100. Whoever makes the most money with this $100 at the end of the year, I think we gave them the scholarship for the year. We scholarshiped them.
That's cool.
It was you know, when you take $100 and you like get really creative, like how can I make this $100? Like you're not thinking like, well, I could buy, you know, this gives me 12 cups of coffee at Starbucks. But instead you're thinking, how can I make this $100, $200?
Yeah.
Can I double it?
Yeah. Do you remember who the winner was or how
I actually don't. We did it 2 years in a row and I actually don't remember either winner, but and the reason I don't is because there were so many really great ideas.
Wow.
You know, people easily did it, took 100 and made it 500. That was like no big deal. And I was thinking like but see, it was 9-month school and I thought for 9 months how to make that $100 more money.
Right.
So this is why I said 5. Why I said 5 sources, because I'm like, if what happened if you laid awake at night and think, is there another way? You know, could I buy a vending machine and put it in my friend's whatever place where there's no vending machines in there?
Yeah. And
could I fill it once a week? Like, could I make $150 a month doing that?
Yeah.
Or, you know, whatever, a week. You know there's just so many ideas, you know, so many things I could do.
I love it. I love that you gave us that challenge of 5 because it does make you stretch and grow and, like you said, think about other ways. Yeah. This is a question from Derek. So in chapter 11 of the book, you talked about some motivational tools that you did with the guys at your auto parts store.
Oh, yeah.
Derek wants to know.
That was really a good chapter.
It was a great chapter.
It was a fun chapter to write because I lived it so much.
I'm sure. Do you ever think like the guys from your businesses would read this? Or like, do you ever think they listen to your stories?
Most of my guys that work for me, they weren't believers. So like, you know, so they might, someday they might. I have one of the guys that is a believer now. He was a heroin addict. After he worked for me, he turned to heroin, lost his family, turned back to God. No, he never was a Christian.
Yeah.
Turned to God.
Okay.
He totally loves me. He runs an auto parts store. He ran mine.
Wow.
Now he's back to run an auto parts store. Every time I see him, he comes out, gives me a hug, and tells me how much he learned from me. Of course, he didn't embrace it at the time. And it'd be fun for him to get this book because he kind of lived it with me.
Oh, that's cool. We should get him a copy. So sorry, going back to the question from Derek was, what were some motivators in your own soul that kept you thriving as a business owner, kept you
Well, I have to say that, you know, I'm probably one of those really rare personalities.
You're very driven.
Yeah, I'm a very driven person, you know. So like when you say like what motivates me, I'm like, I don't know. I've actually been driven my whole life. Like, you know, and I'd say people around me want me to be motivated to like chillax. Yeah, chillax. So like I'm a natural visionary.
Yes.
I love to build things. I am your typical like stereotype man. Like if I like to rescue it. I like to climb it. I like to kill it. I like to win. I don't like to lose. You know, and like, so like, you know, sometimes when we say, well, this is the masculine, they're like, you're stereotyping me. I'm like, I fit the stereotype perfectly, you know. I'm like where it says masculine, you know, right there, like the hair on the chest, all that. It's like, that's totally me, you know. So sometimes you're trying to answer a question that it's an honest, good question.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, well, you've been like that since you can remember thinking.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you don't like, I don't actually know why I'm like that. I just kind of like God, you know, it's like a quiet person is quiet. Why are you quiet? I never remember not being quiet, you know?
Right.
And I never remember not being like, climb a mountain, kill a bear, protect a woman, you know, just like, it's kind of in me, you know, as I got older, like it got like, let's kill all the bears, you know, let's protect all the women, you know, it just got bigger.
I think that one of the motivators for you is helping people.
I love to help people.
And probably in your business, I mean, that was something you did a lot.
Oh yeah. I literally, it is like, I don't have to think about it. Like it's just something I love to do.
Yeah.
Helping people.
Yeah. Well, speaking of helping people, do you like that?
Listen, you're not getting a raise, so we can just forget that, skip that right here.
I'm waiting.
See, one of the sources of income
I know.
is I've taken your raise and I've given it to myself.
Okay, that is not okay. I'm going to go talk to Bill.
That was a joke.
It's a big joke. Okay, so the question is, I'm probably going to butcher this name, but it's from, I would say, Weisters.
Something like that. Mm-hmm.
He is a small business owner, and he says, I'm struggling with quite a strange problem. I feel bad when I'm writing invoices to my clients, especially when the costs are big.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I have a feeling inside that as a Christian, I should do my job for bare minimum or even better for free. So he's obviously talking about he's wanting to help people, but sounds like he's feeling guilty for charging people.
Yeah, and I went through the same thing, and I would say not to offend anyone. You know how like
never offend
diplomatic I am.
Very diplomatic.
Very diplomatic. Lord, that's a poverty mentality.
Okay.
That right there is a poverty mentality. What
would you?
Now, if he said, "Hey, I have a hard time charging Joe because he doesn't have any money," that's a different thing.
Yeah.
We're talking about like broad based, like this is what I'm dealing with every day. It says one, I think my customer thinks like me, and I think my customer thinks I'm overcharging them. I'm not worthy of charging them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh,
that's good.
Yeah, that's a bummer for you because you're actually worth it.
Yeah.
And if you're doing an excellent job, and you're charging a fair price, and a fair price can be, a fair price in my mind is, 5 to 7%. Like I always like to be within 5% of what the competition's charging.
Yeah.
And I like to be on the higher 5%. Like I like to charge 5% more.
Yeah.
And the reason I do that is and it earnestly isn't for my own benefit, even though I don't think that's wrong. But I do it because that gives me 5% more to do stuff like give a big gift to somebody that we made a mistake for. Have extra help the 2 or 3 hours a day when we're really busy, and we wouldn't have been able to afford that extra person, that extra woman, that extra man.
Yeah.
It just all the things that 5% does. Like in a small business, it might be an extra $600, $700, $800 a month, and that little nest egg, it does empower me to do some things for my customers that I wouldn't have been able to do. So I like to kind of stay on the I don't know. I don't like to be like I'm 20% higher than everyone. Well,
Right.
that's fine if everyone doesn't have what you have. But
Yeah.
if you're like most business people, it's like, hey, if you're fixing cars, lots of people fix cars.
They do.
You know, if you're selling candy, lots of people sell candy. You know, so it's like, if you're doing what pretty much everybody else does, I'm like, you know, if you don't have like you know, if you don't have an exclusive on the market of something like a widget nobody has,
Yeah.
I think that, you know, staying reasonable. And the other thing is, you know, if you have a product that everyone buys, let's say you have, it's a metaphor, but let's say you have 10 products and one of them you have an exclusive on.
Okay.
And the other 9 are like milk, like everybody has milk. Like it's like motor oil. Everybody has motor oil. And you're like, you know, I'm like, milk is whatever it is, $2 a gallon or $4, it doesn't matter. And you're like 7. You just said to everybody, like, this is what I charge. I am like ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
And they will think that your widget that you have an exclusive on, it takes on the same philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you're reasonable, if everybody charges $2 for milk and you charge $2 for milk,
yeah.
and this widget that you have an exclusive on, you make an extra 300% profit. You're the only one that has it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, people are still going to view that like that's reasonable because everything in your store is reasonable.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So for the guy who feels bad when he charges people,
it's a self-esteem issue. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
It wasn't me. It was in everybody.
Yeah.
And I would deal with like your self-worth.
Yeah.
Like I would deal with the part of the book that deals with your own self-worth. I'd also read the book Supernatural Ways of Royalty.
I was gonna say
and the reason I say that is because that entire book is about that right there. That entire book starts with a story of my own.
Yeah.
It's a pretty similar story.
Yeah, very similar.
And it really takes you through the steps of like, how do I actually build? I wouldn't even say self-esteem. I'd say God esteem. How do I build God esteem?
Yeah, that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
So good. This is a question from a missionary.
Oh, wow.
In Boston. He and his family are with an organization where you have to support yourself, raise your own finances.
Yeah, like a YWAM, people, things like
exactly.
that. My kids were part of some YWAM for years.
Yeah. He said that basically he seems to never get to the place or goal that they need to basically survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's saying, how do I get out of this place of never having enough as a missionary in an expensive city?
Well, one, you know, I think if you go back to the 5 sources of income thing, and, you know, maybe for someone like that, they think 5 sources of income is 5 different people give me money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I would say that's one source of income.
Right.
Like people give me money. It's
like
one
funding.
It's
fundraising.
yes.
Yeah.
And if I was them, I would do something like I would tithe 10% and I would take another 10% of the money people give me and I would turn it into that challenge that I just said. I took $100 and how do I make it 500? How do I make it 200? And in other words, I would begin to challenge myself that, you know, I'm going to move from, you know, sourcing, people give to me, to resourcing. My money makes money.
Yeah, that's good.
So I would take my sourcing and work to make it resourcing. Yeah. Now that might be, I have $5 extra a week.
Right.
I'm like, okay, can you make that $5 10?
Yeah.
Can you make that $5 10? Can you buy $5 worth of flour, sugar, and all of that? Turn them into cookies, and can you make $10 from 5? I'm talking about simple stuff.
Right. That's really
and then if I can, then so the next month I make that $5 10. Then okay, now I have $10 every month, right? I have $10 every week because I took that $5 a week and I made 10.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, so I went from $5 a week that I put aside, so that's $20 a month in round numbers.
Yeah.
And I just made it 40. Yeah. Then can I take that $40 and can I make it 80?
Yeah. Do
you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
It's like that story of would you rather have $1 million or have a penny doubled every day for a year?
Yeah.
Well, if you know math, you'd want the penny doubled every day for a year, right?
Yeah.
So it's
every day.
Exactly. You take that penny and you double it every day.
Yeah.
So, you know, it doesn't feel like a lot, you know, when I take 1 penny and the next day I have 2, and then I take 2 pennies the next day I have 4.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like I'm a month before I'm still in pennies.
Right. That's so true.
But when it turns to dollars, it starts to multiply, like, right? All of a sudden I had $100 and then the next day I had 200.
Yeah.
And then $200 and the next day I had 400.
Yeah. And
then pretty soon, you know, I'm in the thousands.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's the same. So if I go back here and I go, can I take $5 and make it 10 every week?
Yeah.
Can I?
So good.
That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about like being a freaking genius.
Yeah.
We're just talking about like, what do? I bake cookies. Can you take $5 worth of ingredients?
Yeah.
And do you bake good enough cookies that you can make it 10?
Yeah, that's so good, because I feel like for some people, business, even that word can seem kind of overwhelming, especially if you don't really know business. But it can be something even as simple as baking cookies, or
they should take anything. like Marie Callender's.
Mm-hmm. I was there today, actually.
Yeah, I was there too today.
And we just missed each other.
All the old people were in there with me. But anyway, in our town, Marie Callender's is a little joke, but Marie Callender's, they put 50s music on, and it really is old people.
But we love Marie Callender's.
I love it because it's
we were both there today.
Nice and quiet, and it's like if you want to chill, you go there. Right?
It's very quiet, very calm, nice environment.
But the story of Marie Callender's is very much the cookies I just shared.
Marie, way to go.
And what is the famous cookies? Mrs. Fields cookies. Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever read in her story, but she figured out a way to make her cookies really soft.
Okay.
Just the ones she was baking at home.
Yeah.
And somebody ate one of those and said, man, everyone would want these cookies. Well, when she decided to try it, and she had, they were writing all these commentaries on her cookies, right? The critics. And they're like, nobody wants to eat soft cookies. Everybody wants crispy cookies. And the story, her cookies just took off.
Yeah. Wow.
That woman's literally baking cookies in her home oven.
Yeah.
That's how she started her business.
And it's probably something that she loved doing.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it too, is finding something that you're passionate about and seeing what happens.
Yeah. So sometimes we think of business and we're like, I'm not even good at the stock market. It's like, can you bake cookies? Do people like cookies?
Yeah.
We're talking about not despising the day of small beginnings.
Yeah.
I was listening to the Facebook guy. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name.
Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, and he was testifying a month or two ago in Congress, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And he was just, part of the testimony that was really touching was he said, guys, I started this in my garage.
Yeah.
That guy's a billionaire, and he started he's a nerd, he's a tech nerd, and he just got some ideas and started in his own garage.
Yeah. That's amazing. That was Apple's story as well with Steve Jobs.
Yeah, Steve Jobs. Michael Dell, same thing. These guys started really small.
Right. They didn't just make it big overnight.
No, it takes time.
Yeah.
It's totally. The penny doubled.
Yeah, exactly. That's so good. I'm being challenged. I got to go start a few businesses.
You do. You work for me, though, so you don't really have time for any other source of income.
That's why I need a raise. No big deal.
Oh, gosh. Let's back it down.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about tithing.
Okay.
We got a ton of questions on tithing. This is like a hot topic.
Yes, it is.
So the first question is from Luke. Mm-hmm. He wants to know, should you take your tithe off of a money gift that's given to you? So let's say someone gives you $200. Should you tithe $20 off that money that's given to you?
Okay, so let's say this. So there's the Old Testament tithe that was very strict about tithing off of everything, right?
Right.
And then when we take the Old Testament tithe and we see it in the New Testament, and I think I made a pretty good case for it. So I'm not going to repeat that. If you're watching this webinar and you haven't read the book, then just read the book. Exactly. You read the book. So I'm saying, I think the principle is that you tithe by faith, which means you tithe the first 10% of all your increase, all your increase.
Yeah.
So really business people, and you probably have some questions about this. I probably have 10 of these in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Business people, let's say, for instance, I was in the auto parts business, and at the end of the year, we did $3.5 million in sales. Mm-hmm. If I would have tithed off the sales, obviously our total revenue, I would have tithed $350,000. But there was only $100,000 to $150,000 profit.
Yeah.
So I can't tithe off the sales.
Right.
If I tithe off the sales, I literally am losing money.
Yeah.
So I have to tithe off the increase. I have to tithe off of what is the profit of the revenue.
Right.
And I tithe off of that.
Right.
So I had somebody, writing me, and she's like, I've been tithing. She's actually tithing off the revenue. And she's like, we never have any money, and my husband's. And I'm like, you're tithing off the revenue. What kind of business? She explained. I'm like, oh my goodness, those kind of businesses only have a 5 to 7% net. Yeah. Which is, if you're tithing 10%, you're actually losing 3%.
You're in the red. Yeah.
You're in the red. So business people have to understand, you tithe off the net.
Yeah.
And when you get gifts, and personally, I tithe off of gifts.
Okay.
Because I feel like that's increased to me.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
And if you don't want to tithe off of it, then I would say, like, give an offering. If it's not 10%, maybe you're like, I receive $1 million gift, and I'm like, it isn't increased, but it was a gift from my parents. And like, well, give $50,000 of it away, or give 20,000. Like the bottom line is always in the kingdom, always err on the side of generosity, because it is the reciprocity. It's like I give and I give back, and God gives back to me.
Yeah, that's so good. Here's a question from Crystal. Crystal. She said, my question is about tithing while in debt. Do you try to put all your money into getting out of debt as quickly as possible, or do you tithe and not take care of your debt?
Okay, well, think about this. There's a lot of ways to look at this, and I think the spiritual way that I look at it is like, first of all, God says that the first 10% of your increase is His. Mm-hmm. So, and you can borrow it. You have to repay 7 times back,
right? Which
I didn't say in the book. So it's pretty high interest.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you really don't want to borrow from God. Like, He's not a good guy to borrow from, So
scary.
Yeah. But the other thing is, and most importantly, there was reasons why I didn't put that example in the book, because I'm like, I don't want to paint a picture of God like He's just this over. You can use my money, but it's going to let you 700% interest. I don't think that's the attitude God possesses.
I don't think so.
But it is actually in the Old Testament that God says you can borrow the tithe, but you have to pay 700% back. So I think clarify the question again one more time.
She was basically asking, do you try to?
Oh, I remember the question. Yeah.
Do you try to get out of debt, or do you tithe?
I tithe.
Yeah.
I tithe because I think that I believe that when I give, I receive. Yeah. So I have to, when we were talking about the 5 sources of income, in a different way, it's like, okay, so I have my job over here, or maybe I'm on welfare or whatever. So whoever's somehow I'm getting some money.
Yeah.
And when I give 10% of that to God, suddenly I actually have my source number 1.
Yeah.
I just created a partnership.
That's really good.
With somebody who controls the world. And I'm like, okay, I'm giving you, so what are you going to do with my 10%? So now I'm resourcing, but God's also resourcing my 10% because everybody knows God don't need money.
Right.
Everybody knows that. So God's like, trust me with 10% of your income and watch what I can do with it.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I believe that if you tithe by faith and not through, compulsion, or like, you feel like I'm going to die if I don't do this. But if you tithe through generosity, I really believe that you're going to pay off your debts quicker.
Yeah, that's really good.
Now, let me make a distinction, because we're talking about the tithe.
The 10%.
Yes.
Yeah.
The offering is above the tithe.
Yeah.
I don't give my landlord's offering. I don't give my offering from my landlord's rent.
Right.
It's like, Joe, I can't pay you rent because I bought Henry and his family dinner for $300. Like, you just paid for that with Henry's money.
Yeah.
Now, somebody who's listening to this may say, well, isn't it, didn't you take Henry's money when you paid your tithe? Yeah, but the question there is, do I want to owe God or do I want to owe Henry?
That's a really good question.
Because I was never supposed to take God's money and make it Henry's.
Right.
Like when I rented that house I couldn't afford, and I said, well, I can just take God's money and put it over there. Like, that was really not a good plan, because it steals my engine of reciprocity.
Yeah.
It steals my engine of reciprocity.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Well, I also would love for you to share, I'm going to ask you this question, but maybe in your answer, you could share the story that you shared about Bill, when Bill was...
teaching me to tithe.
Yeah, I'll let you share that in a second. But the question is from Melissa. She said, my heart wants to tithe regularly now, but to give even 2 or 3% at this time would truly be sacrificial for our family. There really isn't 10% that's not accounted for each month. Is God really that concerned about the literal 10%, or is He more concerned about the heart? So what would you say to a family who is like, wow, I can't even give 10% without maybe even like letting my kids...
This is probably the only place that you would find Chris Valentin on the legalistic side, because you know me, like I don't like keeping rules.
Yeah.
But the only place that God ever says, "Test me," the only verse where everywhere else God says, are you testing me? Who are you to test me?
Yeah.
Who are you to test God? But one place in Malachi chapter 3, in the area of tithing, God says, test me in this and see if I will not pour out a blessing on you that you cannot contain.
Yeah.
So here's what I would say to her. I had a really good backstop. Bill said to me, shared all this with me, including the test me thing. He said, why don't you do this? You tithe for 6 months, I think he said. It's accurate in the book. I talked to Kathy about it, but I think it's 6 months. You tithe for 6 months. If God doesn't at least return your tithe, I will give all the tithe back to you.
Wow. Risk-free.
Yeah. So I got the opportunity to not take a risk.
Yeah.
And of course, you know the story. I mean, he did. Like we started to like live at another level.
Yeah.
And it took time. And so I would say this. Why don't you do this? Why don't you figure out some way to squeeze out 10% someplace, like don't eat, fast once a week or twice a week, have the whole family fast, the animals. That part's a little joke. And the fast might be a little bit of a joke in that sense. But I'm saying squeeze out 7% more.
Yeah.
Do it for 6 months.
And see what happens.
And see what happens.
Yeah.
And if nothing happens, at least you can say to God, I tested you and you didn't prove faithful.
Yeah.
Which I feel so confident that he will.
Yeah. That's so cool. I think even for, I have friends that are non-believers and they're not even saved and they'll tithe and they'll give and it comes back to them.
John Lennon tithed his entire life. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. It's amazing. Wow. Here's someone who says, this is from Adam, can you count hours of work as part of your tithe?
That's a really good question.
Adam, you almost stumped him. Look at him.
No, I think that you can count it as offering, you know, but tithe is really it's always mentioned as your increase.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm like, oh, I'll just work 2 hours overtime and not take money for it or give it away or whatever. I'm like, you know, I don't know. He needs to ask Jesus about that. In my personal life, I would say no.
Yeah.
I would say no, but I would say that's an offering. Does offerings matter? Let's say this, like, when God talks about giving to him, he always calls it a tithe. When God talks about giving to anyone else, he always calls it an offering. So tithe means 10.
Yeah.
So that's why it's like I've said, it's probably the only place you're going to find me anywhere in my life, like feeling a little bit on the legalistic side, because like that's how I live and I know it works.
Yeah. And
that's the percent that's mentioned all through the Bible. So Jesus ratified the tithe, as I've said in the book. So I'm like, I tend to be a little bit faithfully legalistic.
Yeah.
Faithfully legalistic, if that's a term.
What would you say to somebody who doesn't necessarily have a home church? Where would you recommend that they tithe to?
Well, tithe always goes to the storehouse. So I'd say whoever's pouring into you spiritually at that point should be, you know, probably where you're tithing to.
Yeah.
I've had people try to tithe me many times, and I just like, they're like, you're our pastor. I'm like, yeah, if you want to tithe to me, please just tithe to Bethel.
Yeah.
Because I feel a lot more comfortable, like just tithe to Bethel. And also it kind of feels like can be kind of a strange relationship. Like, and I don't really want to owe you anything. Like just tithe to Bethel.
Yeah. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. We did get a few questions here. People are asking if we're going to be creating a Bible study or a curriculum kit based on this book. And the answer is yes, we are.
It's coming out when?
It's coming out July 3rd.
We actually already recorded, didn't we? Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah.
So we're going to have
came out really good too.
Yeah,
the curriculum came out really, like we've done like 8 curriculums, and I think it was right, 7 or 8
somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this really came out one of the better ones.
Yeah. It's really well done. It'll be 6 sessions. It'll have a leader's guide, study guide.
I think this is the one we filmed with the students in the in second year, didn't we?
Yes,
that was really good.
Yeah.
It came out really good. Yeah, I think you'll like it, actually.
Yeah, it's really good. So we'll have a box set, which is actually like physical DVDs in July. And then sometime this fall, not sure yet, we'll have an e-course of some sort where people can take it online. So so many options.
Yeah,
many resources.
Great. Yeah.
So we're going to kind of wrap up, but I'm wondering if you could say a prayer over everybody joining us. People want breakthrough, and I'm wondering if you can release your breakthrough over people and just.
I just had this really great experience in that area. We just came back from Brazil Monday. And the last night I taught, they actually asked me to teach on poverty, riches, and wealth. And I did that.
Cool.
And I could feel virtue flowing out of me. It was really like strange in a good way.
Yeah.
Maybe I should say unique.
Yeah.
And afterwards, the pastor was closing and his wife came up. They're co-pastors.
Yeah.
And she said, it was in Portuguese, of course. She said, something was breaking when you were sharing and praying.
Wow.
And I feel like we need to do something, like we need to respond.
Yeah.
And so I just saying that there's faith for that right now.
And sorry, before you pray real quick, I was going to say that when we were, after this book was being, or as it was being printed, we started making declarations that this book carries breakthrough from the poverty mentality.
Yeah.
And we have been getting testimonies
Tons of them,
people saying like, I'm reading this book and the spirit of poverty
almost every day.
off me. Yeah. It's amazing.
I got 3 today.
So,
I haven't showed you yet.
Yeah, so cool. So definitely this book carries a ton of power.
Yeah, I think there's good wisdom in there, impartation. So
go for it.
So I want to pray Deuteronomy 8:18.
Yeah.
And the story's in the book, but Moses comes down from the mountain and the Lord says to him, tell the people that I've given them power to make wealth. And here's the powerful part that rarely gets quoted, that I might confirm my covenant with them.
Wow.
And basically God said, blessing in your life is going to confirm you have a relationship with me.
Yeah.
And so, Lord, I pray for that, for everyone who's watching, everybody's listening, everybody who reads this book, whether they see this video or not, that, Lord, that the Deuteronomy 8:18 would mark their life, that you would give them power to make wealth, that it may confirm that they have a relationship with you. And I bless every single person. I bless them when they come home, that they would have a wealthy family, that they would have a wealth mentality, that their children would all grow up to bless them. And when they go out at their job, at their place of influence, at their place of significance, Lord, that you would bless them, that people would know that the power of the Lord is on them. And I thank you for every single person who's listening in Jesus' name. God bless. I want to say one more thing. I want to thank people who went out of their way. There's lots of reviews already, like 80 this morning or 81, something like that. And I hate writing reviews. It's such a pain,
It takes time.
It takes time.
Yeah.
So I want to just say thank you so much for all of you.
Guys.
Like you stopped your really busy life and you're like, oh, I want to tell people how I feel about this book. It really helps. It really helps. It really helps people to want to read the book, which is the goal. And I want to say, I know what a pain it is to write a review. So thank you very much, those that did it on Barnes & Nobles and on Amazon. And I really appreciate it a ton.
Yeah. And thank you guys for pre-ordering the book.
Oh, yeah. These are the pre-order people.
Yeah. That helped a ton to get this book in the hands of more people. So thank you guys. Also, one more quick note. If you haven't already joined our book club, you can still do that. It's free.
Yeah.
We have activations every week. We have a live Q&A with you every week. We go over the chapter a week. So it's super fun, super dynamic. We're having a great time. It's not too late to join. You can go to bookclub.povertyricheswealth.com.
Can they get the archive of the ones we already did?
You can go back and watch the previous week so you can catch up. Super easy.
And I was really profound.
You were really good this past week.
I was, not so much the further deal beyond that. But anyway.
That one week you were kind of late for a plane.
Yeah, it was a little.
No big deal.
Yes.
I just put that link in the chat so you guys can see that. It's bookclub.povertyricheswealth.com. And
God bless.
Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Chris.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you. Exactly.